NZ National, I'm Lisa Owen. Yeah, Haere Akine, incoming Prime Minister Chris Hipkins. Trust us, there is still plenty of questions to ask as he prepares to pick his ministerial front row and ditch the non-essentials. We also hit the streets to see what policy sides you'd like with your chips. Counting down to the start of school and counting up the costs, uniforms, stationery, technology, where does it end? A 10-year-old budding scientist asked the police to DNA Santa's half-eaten cookie to see if he's real. And the other sizzling hot mystery, bangers and bread dropped into Waiheke letterboxes. Let's all get our Sherlock on. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook or Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, good afternoon. I'm Sarah Bradley. 12 hours after a shooting massacre at a ballroom dancing venue in Los Angeles, the 72-year-old gunman has killed himself. Named as Hu Can Tran, his body was found in a parked van by armed officers seeking him. 10 people were shot dead during Lunar New Year celebrations and 10 others were wounded, some critically. Vice President Kamala Harris says something needs to change in the United States.
A time of a cultural celebration, and yet another community has been torn apart by senseless gun violence. All of us in this room and in our country understand this violence must stop.
The police haven't yet confirmed any motive for the latest massacre. Surf Lifesaving says a boost in funding could help it save more lives. 6 people have drowned in Auckland since Friday, most of them at unpatrolled beaches. Surf Lifesaving's Chief Operations Officer Chris Emmett says putting on more beach patrols could be the difference between life and death.
We could always do with more funding, and we're always working with our funding partners to help increase things around the country and help increase our life-saving footprint. The big challenge is making that sustainable. So that's where we need input, we need funding input, we need community input.
Chris Emmett says that since the border was reopened, more tourists are coming into the country and swimming in unpatrolled waters. Meanwhile, a man who died in the water at Big Manly Beach north of Auckland on Friday has been named by police. He was 65-year-old Paul Ramsey of Manly. The coroner will investigate. Fire forced the closure of the main inland road from Nelson to Christchurch for several hours today, though one lane has now been reopened. Several helicopters and rural fire crews are working to control the fire near the Shenandoah Saddle on State Highway 65 south of Murchison. Samantha G has more.
The first fire crew on the scene called for help from a helicopter as the terrain is hilly and difficult to access by foot. Another 3 helicopters have since been called in to fight the fire, which has tripled in size since this morning and now covers about 15 hectares of vegetation. Monsoon buckets are being filled in the Maruia River and used to douse the fire. Its cause is not yet known.
Followers of the Ratana faith have gathered for the first in-person celebration in 2 years. Tomorrow, the leaders of all the political parties will also return to the small Rangitike settlement. Māori News editor Jamie Tahana is there.
Ratana is as much a political movement as a spiritual one, with particularly close ties to the Labour Party. But the pandemic, as well as changes in the church, have prevented the normal 3-day event from being held since 2020. Today, hundreds of mōrehu arrived from around the country, preparing to mark the 150th birthday of founder Tahu Pōtiki Wiremu Ratana. Both Chris Hipkins and Jacinda Ardern will be there tomorrow.
The mercury is in the mid-20s in Auckland, but popular Mission Bay Beach has a black mark for water quality today with a very high risk of fecal contamination. Safe Swim's water quality monitoring takes rainfall, wind, tide, sunlight and beach type into account. 4 other Auckland beaches are deemed high risk to swimmers today: Cox's Bay, Lindfield Cove, Green Bay and Wood Bay. To sport now, 4th seed Novak Djokovic is facing a blockbuster 4th round clash against the last remaining local hope at the Australian Open tonight. Facing 22nd seed Alex de Minaur, he says he's prepared to silence the parochial Melbourne crowd.
Aussie guy here in front of his home crowd, and I'm sure that the atmosphere will be electric. It's going to be pumped to try to win the match. But, you know, I've had experiences before. I played Leighton Hewitt here. I know how that feels.
In the women's draw, Arina Sabalenka is into the quarterfinals for the first time, beating Belinda Bencic in the opening match of the day. Snowboarder Zoe Sadowski-Synnott will head into the defence of her X Games gold medals this weekend in winning form. She has won the slopestyle World Cup event in Switzerland for the first time, putting together 2 solid runs to beat 16-year-old Mia Brooks for the title. New Zealand squash player Paul Cole is through to the quarterfinals of the Tournament of Champions in New York. The world number 4, who can retake the top spot by winning the tournament, beat Frenchman Sébastien Beaumolet to move into the last 8. And in American football, the Cincinnati Bengals had a 27-10 victory over the Buffalo Bills to return to the AFC Championship game for the second straight season. Bills safety Damar Hamlin, who went into cardiac arrest when these teams played in Cincinnati 20 days ago, attended the game in his first public appearance since then. That's the news.
The country gets set for a new leader.
I wanted to be a Prime Minister that's up front with New Zealanders, one that doesn't surprise people hugely.
The National says he's not what the country needs.
He's a career politician and he's probably very good at it. I come from a different background with real-world experience, and I think that's what New Zealand needs right now.
But it seems at his home in the Hut, people are pretty pleased.
There's a lot of proud people in Upper Hutt, absolutely. We're proud for and pleased for his rise to the top.
A new year and a new political landscape. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Lisa Owen and Checkpoint are next. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers, some possibly heavy this afternoon and evening. Auckland and Coromandel mainly fine, isolated showers in Coromandel overnight. Waikato, Waitomo, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country mainly fine but isolated showers, especially during the afternoons and evenings. Taranaki to Wellington, also Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Cloudy periods, especially in the east, isolated showers mainly about the mountains and ranges. Bulla to Fiordland, also Nelson, Marlborough and inland areas of Canterbury and Otago. Mainly fine, isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges and in Fiordland tomorrow morning. Areas of cloud and patchy drizzle overnight. For Christchurch, Canterbury Plains, North Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and Southland, often cloudy with the odd shower. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. This is RNZ National. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 5. I'll have the headlines at around 20 past.
Nā mihi eho, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā. The incoming Prime Minister spent the day talking to ministers about a looming cabinet reshuffle to be revealed in the next week. Chris Hipkins indicated his government will be reining in programs and projects that aren't essential right now, instead focusing on the economy and what he's described as the bread and butter issues that people care about. Ko taku manuhiri e nai nei, ko Chris Hipkins, the incoming Prime Minister, joins us now. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Hey, you've been talking to MPs. How much clearer are you on portfolio distribution and where everyone fits?
Look, the reshuffle's got a wee way to go yet. To be honest, I'm just in the early stages of that. The key priority for the last few days has to be, to get through the process around actually being elected as the leader and the Prime Minister, and to start sort of shaping up the key priority areas from here. Over the latter part of this week, I'll be talking with my colleagues about portfolios and how they can all contribute. We've got an amazing team of 64 MPs, all of whom have a contribution that they can make. So I want to make sure I have the time to talk to them all.
Announcing the lineup on what day?
I've indicated that I'll announce the lineup next week. I haven't given a specific date yet, but I'll certainly be working on it steadily over the next few days.
Did you do a quick whip around to make sure no one else wants to call it quits this election now that there's been a change in the leadership?
Look, I'll have conversations with my colleagues, about what they see their futures being and how they want to contribute. I know absolutely that all 64 of them, whether they're standing for Parliament again or not at the next election, will want to make sure that they contribute to strong and stable government in the meantime, and that they contribute to a Labour victory in the election.
But do you anticipate there could be some more departures?
Look, I'm not foreshadowing what the outcome of all of those conversations might be at all. We've got an amazing team of people. I want to do them the courtesy of having conversations with them before I start, even confirming or denying or speculating on anything.
Okay. Should we expect to see new ministers?
Yes. Well, by definition, there will be, because there are some retirements, and of course, the Prime Minister has stepped down, and so there will need to be some new ministers to step into some of those roles.
Are you obliged to keep the Green Party MPs on in their roles?
Oh, the agreement that we have with the Green Party is unaffected by a change in leader.
Okay. In terms of policy, I know you're not going to give us specifics, so just some broad brushstrokes. Can New Zealand afford tax cuts?
Look, I'm not going to get into that. What I am going to say, though, is that New Zealanders want to see us focused on the issues that are most important to them at the moment, and cost of living is right at the top of that. I'm not going to get into what's in or what's out or what's on the table.
That's not a question about what's in and what's out. That's about whether we can afford it. Whether you decide to do it or not is a different question. So, can New Zealand afford tax cuts in your view?
Well, look, it's a very clever way of trying to get me to answer a question that I'm not willing to answer at the moment, Lisa, but nice try. Look, in due course, we will set out exactly, what the things are that we will consider. And issues around tax, of course, are always part of the budget process, and I'm not going to preempt the budget process.
What key performance indicators are you going to measure yourself against as leader?
Look, I want to lead a strong and stable government. I want to lead a government that's focused, clearly on the issues that are most pressing for New Zealand. I will be doing a bit of, program rationalisation to make sure that we're narrowing down our focus. I think we've heard the feedback from New Zealanders that they think that we're doing a bit too much, a bit too fast. I think that's fair, and we'll certainly be looking at how we can make sure that we're honing in on the issues that are top of the priority list right now. I want to lead a government that is, that is clear and transparent in its communications, and that New Zealanders know what we're doing and why we're doing it.
But is the outcome of the election the only measure of success that counts in your view?
No, I mean, elections aren't the only. Elections aren't even really a measure of success for political leaders. Actually, what you do in office is what really matters. So when we go into the next election campaign, of course, we'll be going in it to win it, but we're going in it to win it based on what we've done and what we're proposing to do.
Outside of the Australian Prime Minister, have any others got in touch, overseas leaders? Who?
I haven't heard from anyone yet, but that is not to say that there haven't been messages, sent through. I just haven't. I haven't had the opportunity to even look at that yet.
So you are off to Ratana with the Prime Minister for the moment, Jacinda Ardern. I mean, how long is she going to be there beside you? Is she going to mentor you until she goes in April, or how will it work?
Look, I think it's public knowledge. Jacinda and I are very good friends. We're not going to stop being very good friends just because she's moving on to new opportunities in life. I imagine that we will keep in touch where we need to. But Jacinda's also been very clear that she's there if I need support, but she's also not going to, float around if that support is unwanted. I think that's a fantastic way for a departing leader to be. But of course, we'll keep in touch. We're still going to be very good friends.
Is it your goal to kind of be a dull Prime Minister?
No, not at all. I'm going to be myself, Lisa. I think New Zealanders have seen enough of me over the last few years to know that I am who I am, and I'm not simply going to change who I am because I've got a different job. I intend to continue to just be a regular, ordinary Kiwi as much as I can, given the constraints of the role. People can judge me based on their own criteria.
Okay, so let's get to know you a bit better, right? Here's some quick questions. Can you give me some quick answers, please? What makes a good sausage roll?
Oh, the right mix of meat and pastry.
Do your security people now have to cycle to work with you?
They may well. We may well have the odd cycle journey together.
Are you for or against Lycra?
Well, my view up until now might be about to change. I have worn Lycra in the past. I'm not sure that I want to subject the nation's media to that, though, so I may have to rethink my cycling attire.
How many times have you been arrested?
Just the once.
Choose, cat or dog?
Dog.
How many homes do you own?
I have my family home and a holiday home.
What's your superpower outside of politics?
I'm actually a pretty good gardener.
Favourite Kiwi designer?
Oh, crikey, now you're getting into territory that I'm not so familiar with. Can't say that I have one.
Okay, what's your biggest achievement this summer?
I stained the deck and I painted the fence.
Is it okay to lie in your line of work?
No.
Would you choose the beach or the pub?
Or depends whether the sun's shining.
Okay, favourite band, artist or singer?
Look, I love Kiwi music. I'm a kind of a Dave Dobbin, Finn Brothers, Golden Horse type of Kiwi.
Can you dance?
Sadly not.
Hey, have you moved into the big office?
I believe the books and the papers are all being moved on Thursday.
Right, so you won't get in there till then. Are you going to live in Government House?
Not in Government House, in Premier House.
Premier House, sorry, yes.
Look, most of the time, particularly when family things require that, I'll live in my own home. I'm a Wellington-based Member of Parliament. That's not to say that I won't use Government House for official functions, and when it's convenient, and when it's practical to do that.
Appreciate you joining us this evening. That is incoming Prime Minister Chris Hipkins there. So, Chris Hipkins says the government will be focusing on the bread and butter issues people care about. Our reporter Louise Tanuth and cameraman Nick Monroe went to find out what people want to see from the incoming Prime Minister.
Hi, I'm Hannah and I'm a uni student. I live in West Auckland. At the moment, it's quite expensive to live in Auckland. As a student, I do struggle when it comes to grocery shopping. So I'm hoping the new Prime Minister will help with that.
Hello, my name is Jerry Gong. We live in Auckland City and I am a father of 2 kids. So for the new leadership of this country, we do wish to have a better community security, a safer place to live. And also, we do hope we can have a better economy. And also for the health system, we do hope to have a less waiting time for the appointment.
Kia ora whanau, my name's Margaret Lewis and I work for LifeWise as a community capability and capacity builder, and we're really keen to see leadership continue their support of helping people move themselves out of poverty through work, personal and professional development, and it would be amazing if we got funding to support lots of things that we want to do.
My name is John Toma. I live in Otara. I live here long enough. And who comes in to be Prime Minister Chris Hipkins? It's all right, as long as he support and give us some more money. Put some more money in the business and look for the people who really need it. Support them. The thing is facing here in Otara, same old thing. We need some big change.
Hi, my name is Rana Judge and I manage Otara and Papatoi Town Centre as a centre manager. And I've been doing this job from last 15 years. And from the new government, from the Chris Hipkins, we are hoping on security and safety of the public and the small businesses. We hope this new government will be working towards that.
So some thoughts there from some people on the streets of Auckland. We would love to hear from you. Let us know who your ministerial picks are for what portfolios, what policies to dump and what your priorities would be. Be specific. You can get in touch via text 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is almost 18 after 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Auckland beachgoers want more lifeguards on duty as the drowning toll mounts. Over the weekend, 6 people died in the water in and around Auckland. Surf Lifesaving says over the past 48 hours, lifeguards across the region performed a total of 43 rescues, 11 assists and 4 major first aid operations in Auckland alone. Haisa Almeida has more.
2 deaths in a weekend at one of Auckland's most famous summer spots isn't stopping swimmers getting in the water. But those down at Piha Beach today know it's scary.
You have to know your capacity. You can take the risk. I think people underestimate the water here, particularly the West Coast.
You either know that you know, and if you don't know that you know you can do it, then you should really be swimming between the flags.
Waitakere Ward Councillor Shane Henderson says every year there are problems and there must be education for beachgoers.
in Piha and along the west coast. This is hugely a problem, and it's a problem every year that we have this conversation. So we've got to be looking at doing something different. Given that we're an island nation surrounded by water, still so many of us don't have those basic swim skills. And so when they get in trouble, then it can be a really tragic outcome.
The shocking number of drownings in the past month could be avoided with a little more funding.
The lifeguards here do an incredible job. I wish they were funded more than they are. I think they shouldn't be sort of just on fundraising. It should be government funding.
A lot of the lifeguards here are volunteer-based, so that's not going to incentivise them to be in this kind of role.
I think it would be really nice if some beaches that are unpatrolled became patrolled. It must be really hard to allocate the lifeguards to all the different beaches.
Surf Life Saving is a charity and has more than 4,000 volunteers over 80 locations through summer. Just last year, the National Association has saved more than 700 people from drowning. In 2020, Labour announced a first-time contribution to the costs of surf life saving operations at a level of just under $10 million a year, or around 15% of the charity costs. Surf Life Saving's Chief Operations Officer Chris Emmett says in order to be able to cover more unpatrolled areas, the charity needs more resources.
We could always do with more funding, and we're always working with our funding partners to help increase things around the country and help increase our life-saving footprint. The big challenge is making that sustainable. So that's where we need input. We need funding input. We need community input.
He says increasing surf life-saving beach patrols could be the difference between life and death.
Our need is increasing across the country. People are swimming at more remote, isolated locations around the country. We need to get in there and start looking at those seriously.
Surf Life Saving Northern Region is seeking an extra $455,000 from the Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Board. That would help extend patrol hours in the season at West Coast beaches, as well as adding paid lifeguards at 2 new locations, Tawharanui and Te Arai. With more sun and public holidays ahead, lifeguards are staying on high alert, urging swimmers to be cautious while enjoying summer.
It is 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Do send us your feedback. Homai Ofakaro, I'd love your views on safety in the water. Can you swim? Are you an adult who can swim? Did you learn when you were a kid? What about your children? Let us know. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpoint.rnz, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We'd love to hear from you. It is time for us to go to the headlines now. Ko Sarah Arno tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. Police in Los Angeles say a 72-year-old man suspected of shooting dead 10 people at a ballroom dancing venue killed himself when officers approached. The gunman, named as Hu Can Tran, wounded 10 others. Police have yet to confirm a possible motive for the attack, which took place during a 2-day Chinese Lunar New Year celebration. A scrub fire on the main inland road from Nelson to Christchurch now covers 15 hectares, with 4 helicopters aiding the effort to put it out. The blaze is near the Shenandoah Saddle on State Highway 65 south of Murchison. Traffic is being diverted. A West Auckland councillor says swimming lessons need to be made more accessible after 6 people drowned around Auckland over the weekend. Waitakere Ward councillor Shane Henderson says swimming lessons can be too expensive for some families and the government should consider supporting them. Business New Zealand is urging incoming Prime Minister Chris Hipkins to not impose any more unnecessary costs on businesses. Mr Hipkins says he will be tackling what he calls an inflation pandemic and sees the economy as a key focus. Chief Executive of Business NZ, Kirk Hope, wants Mr Hipkins to listen to business concerns. And the Australian government is convening a meeting with dating app operators after a study found 1/3 of respondents had suffered abuse from someone they met using one. The meeting will take place on Wednesday. And to traffic, there are reports of a truck accident on State Highway 1 in Waiheke in Northland. Delays are likely. I'll have more headlines around 22.
Ngā mihi, Sarah. Some of you getting in touch with your feedback after our interview with the incoming Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, there, on the issue of policies and things you would like him to address. This person says bring in a capital gains tax. Sure, that'll get yet more feedback, 2101 on text. Valerie says my policy priority would be to make the first $20,000 of everyone's income tax-free. Second would be to remove GST from fruit and vegetables, Valerie reckons. Another listener says policy priorities should be GST off fruit and veggies, so another one who agrees with that, and anything to help with pea addictions. Someone else says higher tax for the rich and lower tax from the poor and middle class. Do let us know your thoughts. The text again, 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. To sport now, and the Silver Ferns were pipped by 2 goals by Australia this morning in their second Quad Series game in South Africa. The series between New Zealand, Australia, South Africa and England is a warm-up for the Netball World Cup, which will be held in Cape Town in July. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid in the studio. Kia ora, Felicity. OK, what can we take from yet another close game between the world's top 2 sides?
Well, it's a new year, Lisa, but some things are remaining the same there. This is a bit of a dry run for the World Cup, as you mentioned there, but some of the things we saw on court this morning wouldn't be something that you would expect to see during a World Cup game. Had those traditional Trans-Tasman rivalry types of things. It was a tough physical game, and it was obviously ended with that close scoreline with the Diamonds coming back, because the Silver Ferns actually got out to a fast start and took an 8-goal lead into the second quarter. But then it was after that kind of point that you started to see things that maybe you wouldn't during a World Cup game, and it's those player experimentations. So Silver Ferns coach Dame Nolene told her she tried out all 12 of her players, compared to Australia, who just made one change during that hour of netball. And it's actually the second time during this quad series that Dame Nolene has actually taken all of her players out and given them a run on court. She's the only coach of the 4 during this quad series to have actually done that as well. And she
taking the risk when it doesn't matter, well, as much as in a World Cup series.
Oh, exactly. And she's come out after the post-match and said, say it again, in the remaining 2 games that they've got, well, potentially 2 games if they make it through to the final against the Diamonds, she'll expect to do the same again. I mean, amongst all of that chopping and changing, she did actually highlight 2 players who she has liked, and that's goal shooter Grace Waiheke. So she's a younger player in this team, but she's actually showing how good she is underneath the hoop. She's been quite solid and had back-to-back games in the 90% shooting range, and today she nailed 42 of her 44 attempts, so that's pretty solid as well. And the other one's Kate Heffernan in the mid-court. She's quite tall for a centre, so she's been, coach is quite impressed with the partnership that she's actually been able to strike up with some of the other players as well. And as I say, it's go through to the final. If they play the England Roses on Wednesday, if they win that game, they meet the Diamonds on Thursday in the final.
OK, Aussie Open tennis into its final week of action. I mean, who should we be watching out for?
Well, it's one of those tournaments where there has been some knockouts of the players that maybe would have traditionally kept an eye on. Last night, the world's women's top seed, Iga Swiatek, was ousted. It's also Rafa Nadal's out. The number 2 seed, Casper Ruud's out. So at the moment, we're watching the first game here of Andrei Rublev and Olga Rune, who are on court. They're a little bit, they won't want to hear this. They're both top 10 seeds here, but this game could go quite a long time. So they're a little bit of a warm-up for Novak Djokovic versus the local boy Alex de Minaur. So as we probably know, Djokovic is trying for his 10th Australian Open title. He hasn't lost a game in Melbourne since 2018, bearing in mind that he wasn't around during last year due to the COVID situation, but it does put de Minaur into a little bit of a tough place here. He's the 22nd seed, so he's going to be up against it as Djokovic is the 4th seed, has all of this sort of momentum going through this tournament, even though he's got a hamstring injury, which doesn't actually look to be hampering him too much. One of those players that maybe battles through when it matters most. But interestingly, have you been watching the Netflix series Breakpoint?
No, I haven't, but it keeps popping up.
Oh, maybe you should. But actually, of any of those 10 players who feature in that 5-episode series, which is started streaming a couple of weeks ago, all 10 of those featured players have actually failed to make the quarterfinals of the tournament, which start tomorrow.
Well,
so they're calling it the Netflix curse.
Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid there with sport. Now to a sizzling hot summer mystery. Working title, The Surfdale Sausager. Yep, some Waiheke Island residents are puzzled by the regular appearance of snags, yes, barbecued saucies, wrapped in bread, dropped into their letterboxes. Seems like a waste, doesn't it? But it's been going on since April last year at least. And Jacob Coetzee has been caught up in the Snarler scandal and he joins us now. Hi, Jacob. This sounds like it could be a four-parter, you know, Sherlock Holmes special, Miss Marple. What's going on?
Oh, definitely. So it started off, we just went down to check the mailbox and there, you know it, there's a sausage wrapped in bread with tomato sauce and butter. There's quite a lot of effort that's gone into it, and I put it down to drunken shenanigans. You know, somebody lost their dinner, lost their snag in the barbecue, but then started to happen more and more frequently. So I sent a picture to a group of my friends. Sure enough, they had been sausaged too. So it was at that point that I realised that we're dealing with quite a mass sausaging. And it's just been a year of torment, of going to my letterbox, seeing a sausage. It's been a lot of sleepless nights. It's just been horrendous.
It sounds tough, Jacob, but now you have described this sausage in some detail, but I'm looking at a photo of it. I want you to be very specific. What type of bread are they using? Is it toasted? Is it fresh? And sauce? Any more clues?
It appears to be the cheaper white bread, and it's always a Hill's pre-cooked sausage. Quite sure it's the chunky cheese variant, and it started off being cooked, and then as time went on and they got lazier and lazier, it stopped being cooked. And then as the price of food raised and the cost of living crisis also emerged, the price of tomato sauce soared, and as a result of that, tomato sauce stopped being put on on the sausages.
So, do they all pretty much look the same when you compare the photos, and how far and wide have these things turned up on the island? Is it just your area?
So it's all over Waiheke. Started off in the original Surfdale area, hence the name, the Surfdale Sausager. And as time's gone on, it's just the amount of people that get sausaged has spread, and now it's spread to members of faculty at the school. Members of faculty are also being sausaged. And it's traumatising for all the Waiheke residents because nobody knows who's next.
So getting sausaged is just having one of these things turn up in your letterbox, right? Have you tried one? Have you dared to?
I myself have not indulged in a letterbox saucy, but I can't say for a fact that my friends have, but if they have, it didn't kill them.
Okay. Now, I have to ask you this. Is it you, Jacob?
I am not the Surfdale Sausager. This is exactly what he wants. He wants a division within the community. This is his aim. It's his motive to divide us all. I am not the Surfdale Sausager.
Jacob, how do you know it's a he?
Oh, I think...
Do you know who it is, Jacob?
I myself don't know who it is, but I feel like women would have more common sense than to do such a shenanigans.
Okay, what do you reckon the motivation is? Come on, give us some theories.
I reckon it's one of those Waiheke local vegetarians who's had enough of the munching of meat culture on the island.
But then why would you perpetuate it, Jacob? Why would you perpetuate it by delivering these sausages, I'm wondering? And also it's pretty costly exercise, isn't it?
It is. I can't tell you the price of sausages, but I'm sure they're not cheap. And to do this for well over a year now is it's costly. It's very costly.
Okay, I really appreciate your help with this, Jacob. That's Jacob Coetzee, and we want to know if you know what's going on with the mystery sausage deliverer. Snarlers in the letterbox, 2101. We'd like some clues, please. Motivation, let us know your thoughts. It is 28 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You were listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins us to talk all about business. What are we yakking about today, Nona?
We're going to talk about Serco.
Oh, yes.
Now, do you know what Serco does? They sell basically software as a service to businesses to manage their travel. Anyway, they have updated their outlook for revenue. Now, just want to say, first of all, their profit outlook, they've made a loss in the last couple of years, and they're not expecting to turn a profit until 2025. So we're just talking about revenue here. Yep. This is from customers. They said that it more than doubled in the December-January period because of a much larger number of people willing to travel for business over the period, which was unexpected. They weren't expecting that much, and it's usually a quiet period. So those were extraordinary numbers. They're expecting their revenue for the year ending in March to be between $42 and $47 million. That compares with $18.9 million the year earlier, which is, more than twice. So that's good. The chief executive, I had a chat with him. He's saying that the outlook is quite positive because business travel hasn't completely come back yet. It's still about 10 to 20% behind where it was. And the idea that somehow we weren't going to see as much business travel because of online tools, that kind of thing, he doesn't expect that to happen. He's saying that really business travel, people have recognized the value of face-to-face, and we all appreciate that, especially after the lockdowns and so on. He's saying that business travel is coming back. It's not come back as strongly yet, and that's because we haven't got the full schedule of routes back, air travel, that kind of thing. And of course, as a result of that, the prices are higher. So he says that businesses are spending just as much. So he expects that's going to continue. And business travel likely to recover. And certainly the market loved that. The share price jumped up 11% and finished up by 9% today.
Okay, so the economic downturn offers opportunities for investors. Who sees them? What are they?
I spoke to a couple of wealth investment gurus. One was Mark Lister from Craig's, and the other was Greg Smith from Devon. And both of them said, look, this is a good time to be looking at opportunities. There's a lot of really good company stocks in the New Zealand market that are underpriced. So we started last year around 13,000 level for the index, finished off under 12. So lots of room for growth there. And a number of the very big companies that we see in the top 10 came down quite a lot. Those are companies that offer both growth and dividends. Say Fisher & Paykel, for example, is one of those companies. We talked about them last week. Their share price had, just rose 5% on some good positive news. They're one of the companies that are mentioned. It's one of those things where if you're looking, Mark Lister put it up pretty well. He said, he doesn't like paying full price for anything. And these days, you don't have to pay full price. But there's something for everyone. So even if you don't really want to take a risk, and that's a lot of people in the retirement age and that sort of thing, you can put your money in the bank and get a pretty good return now. Fixed income investments are returning a better return than we've seen in years. So there's something for everyone. If you've got some cash, that's if you have some cash, you might want to put it into the market because you might make some money. Who knows?
Okay, Nona, let's take a quick sprint around the market.
Well, we fell 0.25% today, but that's a 29-point drop to 11,949. But that's also because the markets in Asia have been closed for a holiday. There's no steer coming from there. So we don't know exactly what the market will be doing until probably the middle of this week. It's going to be quiet. As well, we had Wellington Anniversary Day. So I wouldn't read too much into that little drop. And the New Zealand dollar is up. And that's because the U.S. dollar is not doing as well. It's starting to see the investors there are starting to pick that maybe inflation has softened enough, economic growth too. So maybe the U.S. Federal Reserve won't go as hard on interest rates as was anticipated. That saw our dollar drive up 64.7 U.S. cents. That's higher than it's been for a while. 92.8 Australian and 52.1 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with Business News. 10 people have been killed and at least 10 others injured in a mass shooting in Monterey Park near Los Angeles. The gunman opened fire in a dance studio as people celebrated the Chinese Lunar New Year. He then went to another studio before fleeing after 2 people tried to take his gun from him. Los Angeles County Sheriff Robert Luna says the gunman was later found dead in a white van.
During the search, several pieces of evidence were found inside the van, linking the suspect to both locations in Monterey Park and Alhambra. In addition, a handgun was discovered inside the van. The suspect has been identified as Hu Can Tran. He is a 72-year-old male Asian.
And the ABC's Angus Randall explains how events unfolded.
It was supposed to be a celebration of the Lunar New Year, but any sense of joy was destroyed when a heavily armed man entered the dance hall and opened fire. At least 10 people were killed and another 10 injured. The suspect then ran away. Monterey Park is 15 kilometres away from downtown LA and is home to one of the largest Asian American communities in the United States. Los Angeles County Sheriff Robert Luna doesn't know why the gunman did it.
Everything's on the table. We don't know if this is specifically a hate crime defined by law, but who walks into a dance hall and guns down 20 people? The description we have now is of a male Asian. Does that matter? I don't know. I can tell you that everything's on the table.
A second dance hall in the area was targeted 20 minutes after the fatal shooting. No one was killed in the second attack. Authorities believe the events are connected.
A male Asian suspect walked into a dance hall, and he walked in there with a firearm, and some individuals wrestled the firearm away from him. That individual took off.
Sheriff Luna says to expect a heavy police presence at other Lunar New Year events in the coming days. Gene Wu is a Chinese-born Democrat member of the Texas House of Representatives. He says Asian Americans have been facing a rise in hate in recent years.
It coincides with a lot of the rise in white supremacy, or the resurgence in white supremacy within the United States, a resurgence in anti-immigrant sentiments, and frankly, it's just often people are looking for a scapegoat for all the ills of the world, for all the problems of the coronavirus and all the lockdowns and everything else. People are looking for other people to blame on this, even though Asian Americans have nothing to do with what happened.
The attack has shaken Monterey Park at what would usually be a week of celebration. Peter Ng is the CEO of the not-for-profit Chinatown Service Centre and a long-time Monterey Park resident.
Monterey Park is well known for Chinese American to be living in there. In fact, it's over 50%, 63%. And I live in Monterey Park myself for over 40 years, so I understand the city has been very peaceful and quiet. It's known to have many, many restaurants and places where Chinese cultures are there. So this type of this scale, it just never happened before, so the whole community just completely shocked.
Tens of thousands of people had been attending the Lunar New Year's festivities in the hours before the assault. Democrat Congresswoman Judy Chu was among those celebrating.
It is horrible that such a thing could occur at a time of celebration for so many in the AAPI community and in the Asian community worldwide. This is a time to be with family, to celebrate, and yet this tore a hole through all of our hearts.
Judy Chu says American tragedies like this can be prevented.
Unfortunately, I have now become a member of the club of members of Congress who've had a mass shooting in their districts. It has been happening on a daily basis now, and we can barely keep count of these mass shootings. Something has to be done. We have to stop having the availability of these assault weapons on the streets, so that it's so easy for somebody to just walk into an establishment and shoot people and ruin their lives.
Democrat Congresswoman Judy Chu ending that report from the ABC's Angus Randall. It is 17 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Heaps of you getting in touch about swimming and water safety. Hazel has sent us this message saying, I learned to swim when I was 65 with my local swim club in Port Chalmers. It is never too late, says Hazel. Thanks for getting in touch. And another person says, swimming, no other sports were allowed at my school until swimming competence was displayed. Do keep that feedback coming to 2101 on text. Homai o whakaaro, get in touch about anything you've heard on the programme this evening. We would love your feedback. What policies do you think the government needs to ditch? What ministers would you like to see get what portfolios? What about the new blood that you would like to see brought through in the government? Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines now. Anea Sarah, mena pita pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. The incoming Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says he's only in the early stages of deciding his ministerial lineup, but remains committed to announcing a reshuffle next week. Speaking to Checkpoint, Mr Hipkins confirmed Labour's agreement with the Green Party was unaffected by Jacinda Ardern's departure, meaning James Shaw and Marama Davidson will retain their roles. He declined to say whether he believed New Zealand could afford tax cuts. Mr Hipkins will head to Ratana tomorrow with Jacinda Ardern, her last outing as leader. US Vice President Kamala Harris says something needs to change in the United States after another gun massacre. 10 people were shot dead during Lunar New Year celebrations at a ballroom dancing venue in Monterey Park near Los Angeles, and 10 others were wounded, some critically. The 72-year-old gunman later killed himself. A scrub fire on the main inland road from Nelson to Christchurch now covers 15 hectares, with 4 helicopters aiding the effort to put it out. The blaze is near the Shenandoah Saddle on State Highway 65 south of Murchison. Traffic is being diverted. A West Auckland councillor says swimming lessons need to be made more accessible after 6 people drowned around Auckland over the weekend. Shane Henderson says swimming lessons can be too expensive for some families and the government should consider supporting them. And Christchurch's bus interchange has been reopened after being closed today and yesterday due to an IT problem. Those are the headlines. I'll have a full news bulletin at 6 o'clock.
Thanks, Sarah. The final weeks of school holidays may not feel like much of a holiday for parents rushing around making sure kids have everything they need. And for some, the cost of back-to-school necessities like stationery and uniforms can be overwhelming, with massive disparities between the different schools, what different schools require. But some schools and organisations are helping to alleviate this burden where they can. Tom Taylor reports.
With 4 kids of school age, Nelson mum Megan Pullen holds her breath when reading their stationery lists each year. She pays for 2 of the kids, and when combining stationery with uniform costs, the total can quickly stack up.
Just for those 2 children, we are probably spending $350, if not more, a year.
Normally, Ms. Pullen would try to reuse as many books and pens from previous years as possible, but some of her kids are now expected to hand everything on their lists over to their teacher on the first day of school for it to be shared among the class as needed. This new shared approach means Ms. Pullen's unable to turn to some of her usual money-saving techniques.
It was quite strange that both the schools said that they were going to be sharing the stationery, not to name them, not to cover them or anything, and we had to order through the specific website, which meant we weren't allowed to order from somewhere else to try and make it cheaper.
In contrast, at Masterton's Lakeview School, parent Casey Watson was delighted to discover that this year the school would be providing all students stationery for free.
I was so happy when I got the letter because it was that money that I didn't need to pay towards another school item, and then also the thought of not having to go and deal with finding the books at the stores was amazing.
Ms. Watson used to spend between $50 and $80 on stationery at the start of each year. Now that money will be put towards uniforms, which remain a significant expense. Principal Tim Nelson says the initiative was a simple thing the Board of Trustees could do to help parents battling with rising costs.
These are really, really tough times, and people are really, really appreciative. And the other thing is it means that everyone starts with their stationery, the same stuff. So every kid in the school will turn up on the first day of school and their stationery will be there for them.
Because Lakeview doesn't ask parents for any donations, it receives about $150 per student in funding through the Ministry of Education. Mr. Nelson says it's this funding that made the free stationery possible.
We have a lot of kids, so it's going to cost a lot of money, but it's definitely a really good way to spend money.
But parents are expected to pay at least something at most other schools, and there's a big variation. In a random selection of 10 Auckland primary schools, Checkpoint found a range of more than $100. The average stationery pack cost $56. The lowest was a Year 1 pack at a South Auckland primary at just $14. The highest was a Year 6 pack at a North Shore primary, coming in at $127. Several charities have sprung up, operating stationery or uniform banks in the same format as food banks. Education is a right, not a privilege founder Benji Pritchard says as school subjects become more specialised, the equipment required ramps up in price.
The cost of stationery often gets disregarded as a real small cost, but it's still like a real big cost. Like you've got things like a graphics calculator that could cost a family $150, $170.
Mr Pritchard collaborates with schools in the Manawatu and Wellington regions, providing kids in need with exactly the same stationery items as everyone else, in a discreet manner.
The reason we take that approach is so that the kids don't feel like they're sitting there with different books if everyone's got the same book except for them in the class. And it goes back to the whole not wanting anyone to feel like they're sticking out because of financial backgrounds, which how can you make them feel the same?
Before the first term last year, the charity distributed about 3,000 stationery packs, and Mr Pritchard says while the need remains so high, they're on track to do the same again this year.
And joining us now is Financial Advice CEO Katrina Shanks. Hi Katrina, have you got any idea, basic costs of getting a child back to school? Can we put a figure on it?
Yeah, no, so it really varies depending on the school, depending on what the uniform is, depending on whether they need school stationery, depending on whether they need technology or not. But for example, if you had a child which needed technology for the first time in the school, you could be looking at anything between $500 and $2,000 to just get the technology requirement in place for them. And then if you've got multiple children, of course, that increases significantly more. So if you were going new into a school with technology, the need for technology, a new uniform and stationery, you could be looking at $1,500 or $2,000 quite easily for that child.
That's a significant whack of money.
It's absolutely huge for any family. So, on the back of Christmas as well and holidays, and you've got school fees coming up for many families, you've got school camps coming up as well. The financial pressure on families this time of year is significant.
Okay, I just want to get to some tips. And obviously long-term planning is great, but if you are facing this financial hurdle right now, can you give us your number one hack, really, for making it a little bit cheaper if you haven't or have not been able to put aside money?
Yeah, so obviously planning is the best thing, but if you haven't been able to plan and put that bit of money aside, second-hand is great. Swapping with friends is also really helpful. Swapping bags of uniforms can bring the costs down. Some of the shops have started their sales already, so wait for the stationery sales before you start going and buying it. And for many parents, you go in there and with your kids and they're all excited and they want this and they want that. Sometimes shopping online makes it so much cheaper because you're not adding into that cost all the time with your children asking for something that's a little bit different or a little bit more special. And I suppose the last thing now is if you're really stretched and you just can't do that lump sum right now at the beginning. For some people, buy now, pay later. You can smooth the cost of that out over 2 or 3 or 4 weeks.
But there's a couple of warnings with that, isn't there, Katrina?
That's what I was about to put in, but absolutely make sure and understand that's your future cash flow and you can make those repayments. And for some, that might be a good option to smooth those costs over 2 or 3 weeks, as opposed to having it all in the first week come through. But it does go into your future cash flow.
So in terms of long-term planning, what advice would you give people? So this year, will listen to your tips and hopefully get some dollars off their expenses. But looking toward next year, what can you do?
It's all about your financial behaviour and how you plan for your future. And I know we talk about budgeting, but budgeting is key, and budgeting into what I call buckets of money. So, for example, you could set up 4 or 5 different accounts online, which doesn't cost you anything, and every account's a different bucket. So every week you can put $30 or $40 into a kids account, for example, and that kids account will slowly build, and that pays for your school camps and your fees and your stationery, uniform, and the costs that come up for your kids over the year. So you're actually allowing yourself to plan and budget for it every time you get paid. You put just a little bit in, and that adds up really quickly. So my top tip, I suppose, is look at bucket budgeting, where you're putting something towards your goals and what you want to achieve every year. And part of that will be smoothing those big costs over the year. So if something goes wrong, you've got some money in that account to pay for it.
And you know, that's great if you've got $30 to put to one side, Katrina, but people will be struggling with the cost of living, rising inflation. Outside of that, where else can you go for help?
Well, the schools sometimes have some assistance. MSD can provide some assistance as well if you're really struggling. They can do one-off payments for you and can lend you money as well. The other thing is I know there are a lot of charity shops out there that have held some stationery back and some uniform items back for this time of the year. So things like the Sally's Salvation, Sally's charity shop and Mary Potter Hospice, for example. I know if you go in there, they've got uniform parts to some of their shops where they've just held back on that for parents. So you can go and get a lot cheaper secondhand through those shops. So be creative. Think where can you go to get not only additional assistance, but also where it's relatively cheaper than it is buying everything brand new.
Thanks for that, Katrina. That is Katrina Shanks, who's the CEO of Financial Advice New Zealand. Love to hear from you on that one. Let us know how much it's costing you to get your kids back to school and how you're coping with it. It is 7 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And we do have a little bit of feedback on the Surfdale sausager, as it's been called by some people on Waiheke Island. This is the person who is dropping sausages wrapped in bread into, well, it seems like random letterboxes around the island. It's been going on for more than a year. Someone's got in touch, and we interviewed a local chap about this, Jacob's his name, and someone's got in touch to say, Jacob is enjoying this way too much. They reckon that Jacob is the Surfdale sausager. He absolutely denies it. We did ask him that question directly. This person says, I liken him to a butcher's shop Banksy. We would love some real clues to who this is. Do get in touch, 2101 on text. Bus passengers have been left confused after an IT issue temporarily closed Christchurch's bus interchange. The terminal closed yesterday afternoon and buses have been using the Manchester Street Super Stop as a temporary interchange location. Our reporter Anna Sargent and cameraman Nathan McKinnon took to the streets of Christchurch to find out how people have been affected.
Christchurch's bus interchange is a vital transport hub for many bus passengers in the city. Streams of confused people who had come to catch a bus were being directed elsewhere today. This woman says she takes the bus almost every day and hopes the interchange will be back up and running soon.
Off the bus and they said the bus exchange was closed, and it's very convenient for people going to work or going to do shopping like we are, so now we've got to walk.
I'm standing outside the Christchurch bus interchange, which is temporarily closed due to an unexpected technology outage. People have been relocated to Manchester Street, about 3 blocks away, where most bus routes will be running from there. Getting on and off at unusual spots is disrupting some people's journeys.
Yeah, I wanted to go to Riccarton, but there's really no information of where to catch it from now, apart from what the little sign says, Manchester Street and Hereford Street.
It is a bit of an inconvenience when I do need to make my way around Christchurch and go to where I need to be, as I can't drive at the moment.
We just found out now, so I caught the bus from Riccarton and we all just got dropped off here in Manchester, and that's when I found out buses weren't running as usual. So it's a bit of an inconvenience, but I suppose if you've got internet, you'll know more.
Other bus passengers say the interchange's closure hasn't affected them too much.
We knew what was going on, so we knew what was happening, so it was really well communicated, so it's not going to make much difference at all, I don't think.
Just a matter of walking from there to here, and I've got 2 good legs.
Do you think it'll affect many people in Christchurch, your bus?
Probably the very old ones that go to the exchange, and they find they've got to walk here, perhaps, yes, and may do. But I don't know how long the exchange is closed for, it doesn't say.
In a statement, Environment Canterbury says the technology system that manages bay allocation and bay door operations at the interchange was not functioning. Late this afternoon, the system came back to life.
And you can check out that story online. The video version will be up there. Across the Tasman, a growing number of companies are now offering their employees the option to work on Australia Day and take a day of leave on another day. But some Indigenous activists say ignoring or abandoning the public holiday isn't necessarily the answer. The ABC's Oliver Gordon reports.
shoppers at Melbourne's Queen Victoria Market have different views on what's become a divisive public holiday.
I would prefer to work on Australia Day because I don't want to honour it as a day to celebrate or a day to, like a public holiday to have off, because it's Invasion Day.
I do sympathise with the way that that particular date can upset people, but I don't feel like it should interfere with the day off, basically, you know.
Late last year, Telstra and Woodside announced they were offering the option of working on January 26, following similar moves by Deloitte, KPMG, Spotify and Channel 10. But it's not just large corporates making the offer. Melbourne man Hugo works for a mid-sized construction company. He says his managers are respecting his wishes to work this Thursday.
It's a day that I think is insensitive to large sections of the wider community. I think it's probably a day that we could celebrate in a different way on a different date.
And so your work has allowed you to take another day off instead of Australia Day?
Yeah, that's right. It's not something done across the company, but I approached my manager about it and they were happy to let me do that.
So should we expect this to be the norm? Emma Clark from the Queensland Chamber of Commerce and Industry says it could ultimately come down to whether or not businesses are up for paying the extra rates.
Penalty rates, of course, do exist on all public holidays. So therefore, it's between the business and the employee as to whether an employee needs to substitute or wants to substitute a public holiday. And if the business decides that that's in their best interest, if it suits the business for the employee to work on a public holiday, then that's for them to decide.
Right, let's get to some of your feedback before the news at 6. On swimming, Mike says we can't patrol all beaches, but what about an app that tells you that a beach is not for swimming or there could be grades for other beaches? More signage could help non-locals. Yeah, Safe Swim, Mike, has on it whether there is a patrol at the beach, but potentially, good idea to say whether it's dangerous or not at that particular time. Another listener says Moana Pool in Dunedin is a fantastic resource. The wave pool and river give young people a chance to experience moving water, even if it is on a small scale. And another says, shouldn't you be asking people if they can float on their backs? Asking if they can swim is too broad. Floating on your back after growing tired is going to save your life. But you learn a lot of that stuff when you go for swim lessons, don't you? On the subject of Chris Hipkins as incoming Prime Minister and policies of priority, some of you, a lot of you actually getting in touch saying get rid of GST, fruit and veg, has to happen. Others say keep it simple and give tax incentives for caregivers. That one from Kath. Another one says Peter, he reckons his priority is to tackle the excessive profits, as he calls them, by Aussie-owned banks. And another person says, capital gains tax, even though I'll get caught.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Sarah Bradley. The man who shot dead 10 people during Lunar New Year celebrations in Los Angeles has killed himself inside a van as armed police approached. The BBC's David Willis reports the 72-year-old gunman, named as Hu Can Tran, has tried to attack a second venue.
After the shooting in Monterey Park, which is a majority Asian American community, this suspect went on to another area called Alhambra, and he attempted to get into another gathering armed with what they say was a semi-automatic assault pistol. Now, he was barred from entry by two individuals at that event. They overpowered him, he ran off, but they seized the weapon from him, and the police say that had they not done so, then this man could have killed a lot more people.
The incoming Prime Minister has indicated his predecessor will allow him space to make the job his own. Chris Hipkins will attend Aratana's annual festivities tomorrow, along with Jacinda Ardern in her final outing as Prime Minister. He told Checkpoint she won't be crowding him.
Jacinda's also been very clear that she's there if I need support, but she's also not going to, float around if that support is unwanted. I think that's a fantastic way for a departing leader to be. But of course, we'll keep in touch. We're still going to be very good friends.
Chris Hipkins says he's in the early stages of deciding his ministerial lineup, but remains committed to announcing a reshuffle next week. He has confirmed that Labour's agreement with the Green Party is unaffected by the leadership change, so James Shaw and Marama Davidson will retain their roles. Tip-offs from overseas have led to a man being charged with possessing and importing child sex abuse content. Customs says the 42-year-old Filipino national arrived at Wellington Airport on Saturday after a holiday in the Philippines. Lucy Sia reports.
Customs says the man's Wairarapa home was searched today after it was alerted by an overseas-based social media chat platform and the US National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children. Child sexual abuse images were found on 2 phones and the arrested man appeared in the Wellington District Court today. Customs says its investigation continues and further charges may be laid.
Surf Lifesaving says a boost in funding could help it save more lives. 6 people have drowned in Auckland since Friday, most of them at unpatrolled beaches. Surf Lifesaving's Chief Operations Officer Chris Emmett says putting on more beach patrols could be the difference between life and death. He says that since the border was reopened, more tourists are coming into the country and swimming in unpatrolled waters. The Transport Minister says the last National-led government badly neglected the Auckland rail network, leaving the current government to fix it up. 2 major projects aimed at improving the network are underway in South Auckland. Michael Wood says a lot of hard work is being done to deliver the projects on time and to budget.
Our government inherited a rail network that was in a state of managed decline, that had been left to rack and ruin under the previous government, who were dismissive of any investment in rail. And we've got the hard job now of making sure that we build the improvements that we're talking about today, but that we also make up for decades of underinvestment.
Michael Wood says the best option is to get maintenance done now and make sure the network is safe. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission is to help the Australian investigation into a fatal helicopter collision on the Gold Coast 3 weeks ago. 4 people were killed and 3 seriously injured when 2 helicopters collided near the SeaWorld helipad. 2 New Zealand couples survived the mid-air crash. The Commission has confirmed it will gather evidence from New Zealand-based organisations and act as a liaison for the citizens involved in the crash. A New Zealander living in Peru says the protests causing havoc there are becoming increasingly violent. Cuzco resident Garth Warner says local police don't want to be around the protesters.
When they say the paro's on, it's like a national strike. To enforce the paros, they block the roads with rocks and trees, and they put everything on fire, and they burn all their rubbish in the middle of the road. You know, if you try to pass through the paros, good luck to you, because they will smash your windows, man. That's the way that is.
Garth Warner says farmers make up most of the protest movement, who are calling for the resignation of President Dina Boluarte and the release from prison of her predecessor, Pedro Castillo. Increased levels of toxic algae have been found in Southland's Waiheke River near the Excelsior Creek inflow. Environment Southland says the algae can be recognised in rivers and streams as a dark green-brown slime on rocks or dark brown-black mats at the water's edge. Senior scientist Katie Blakemore says river users should be on the alert and keep dogs away from the algae, which if eaten can be lethal to animals. And the West Coast Regional Council is also urging dog owners to look out for algal blooms this summer. Its science team leader Johnny Horrocks told Local Democracy Reporting that when ingested, a piece of algae the size of a 50-cent coin is enough to kill a dog. Anyone who becomes unwell after contact with contaminated water should visit a doctor immediately. That's the news.
Tomorrow on Afternoons with Jessie Mulligan, meet the Zennials. British columnist Esther Walker joins us to discuss this unique demographic born between 1977 and 1983. They've got cynicism from the Gen Xers and a bit of entitlement from the millennials, and they bring a unique perspective to the table. We'll discuss how this generation is coming into their own in 2023 and how their unique experiences of growing up analogue will shape their impact on the world. That's on Afternoons with me, Jessie Mulligan, tomorrow from 1 on RNZ National.
And we're on air, online and on demand, and there's more news on our website, rnz.co.nz. Time now for the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, a few showers, some possibly heavy this afternoon and evening. Auckland and Coromandel, mainly fine. Isolated showers in Coromandel overnight. Waikato, Waitomo, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mainly fine, but isolated showers, especially during the afternoons and evenings. Taranaki to Wellington, also Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Cloudy periods, especially in the east. Isolated showers mainly about the mountains and ranges. Bulla to Fiordland, also Nelson, Marlborough and inland areas of Canterbury and Otago. Mainly fine. Isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges and in Fiordland tomorrow morning. Areas of cloud and patchy drizzle overnight. For Christchurch, Canterbury Plains, North Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and Southland. Often cloudy with the odd shower. Cloudy periods also. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. This is RNZ National. It's coming up to 7.5 minutes past 6. I'll be back with headlines at past.
Kia ora rā, Sarah. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Transport Minister has admitted Auckland's rail network is neglected, but believes commuters today have something to smile about. The government is investing more than $1.5 billion into upgrades to the city rail network. Renovations and upgrades at Pukekohe Station and the Southern Line mean a straight shot into the city, which Michael Wood says is a long overdue. Finn Blackwell was at the construction site.
It's one of the biggest investment projects in Auckland, construction whirling on a new subdevelopment in Pairata, just out of Pukekohe. It'll be the size of Dunedin. Surrounding it, a brand new electrified train line carrying passengers from Pukekohe into the Auckland CBD. But in the shorter term, what's coming down the tracks for rail commuters is major disruption. There will be rolling line shutdowns across the Auckland rail network while track maintenance takes place. Michael Wood says it's an inconvenience, but it's necessary.
We can either bite the bullet and get on with making sure we get that maintenance done. That means a bit of short-term pain, temporary closures of parts of the network, one section at a time, or we could make it slower and drag it out over years and years and years.
He described the state of the rail as neglected, saying they're working hard with Kiwi Rail and Auckland Transport to deliver the project on time and on budget.
Our government inherited a rail network that was in a state of managed decline, that had been left to rack and ruin under the previous government, who were dismissive of any investment in rail. And we've got the hard job now of making sure that we build the improvements that we're talking about today, but that we also make up for decades of underinvestment.
The minister says the best option is to get maintenance done now and make sure the network is safe, something Mr Wood says would spell bad news for Aucklanders if not completed properly.
We're making the tough decision, putting the investment in, Kiwi Rail's delivering that maintenance, and I believe that'll be the best outcome for Aucklanders. And of course we work closely with Auckland Transport to make sure that we do have replacement public transport services in place at that time.
Auckland Transport's interim chief executive, Mark Lambert, says the upgraded Southern train line will help keep commuters moving without disruptions.
Aucklanders are looking for improved public transport, improved rail, new stations, where Auckland Transport's already placed an order for additional trains, and we're purchasing an additional 23 trains which will be here over the next couple of years. So along with the City Rail Link improvements, new stations out south, it's a massive investment in rail.
But locals in Pukekohe are wondering, is it actually worth it?
Do you use the train? No.
No, I don't use the train.
Yeah, probably wouldn't mind taking the kids out for a bit of a train ride. Yeah. They've not been on the train before.
I do not. No.
And this family had opposing views.
I just drive where I need to go, and I work locally, so there's no need for me to catch a train. What are your thoughts on the train system being shut down at the moment with the upgrade?
Oh, it's not convenient at all.
Yeah.
I mean, the teenagers, before I got my restricted, we all had to catch the train all the way up into the city, but we can't now.
Closer to town, Mr Wood says light rail in Auckland remains a priority for Labour, even with a change in leadership. And the minister has ruled out any further extension to the half-price public transport fares. With next year's completion deadline looming, the upgrades will need to prove to those unconvinced that they're worth the wait.
It is 11 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. 10 people have been killed in a mass shooting in Monterey Park near Los Angeles. The suspect is a 72-year-old man who's been found dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Hu Can Tran is accused of opening fire in a dance studio during Lunar New Year celebrations. 10 others were injured and some are in a critical condition. Sheriff Robert Luna says the suspect was found dead in a white van.
The suspect responsible for this tragedy is no longer with us. That was the person that is deceased now, and you're asking me if we feel we're safe. He's the one responsible for this. He is no longer a threat. We want to get to the motive. We want to know what the heck happened here. The only way we're going to get there is through a lot of very hard detective work. We're looking at all criminal history, mental health history, and those are all things the detectives will take a very hard, long look at and see if it impacted what occurred here, the motive, and that's part of the learning lessons and sharing them with our partners and seeing if there's any gaps that were there that we may have missed.
Thousands were celebrating the Lunar New Year in the Los Angeles area, which has a large Asian American population. BBC reporter Peter Bowes has the details.
The injured being taken to hospital at the scene of another mass shooting. A ballroom in this predominantly Asian community on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The police say when officers arrived, people were pouring out onto the street. Many were screaming. 10 were pronounced dead at the scene, 5 men and 5 women. At least 10 others were taken to hospital. The suspect, described by the police as an Asian man aged between 30 and 50. He fled the scene, but about 14 hours later was believed to be holed up in this white van, surrounded by heavily armed officers some 20 miles away. This community had been celebrating the Lunar New Year, full of hope and optimism for the future. But like so many other American cities before them, they're now mourning the dead from a horrific act of violence. Investigators say it's too early to pinpoint a motive for the attack. The street party here was cancelled. It's one of the largest Lunar New Year celebrations in California and had been due to continue all weekend.
Everyone was having fun, and it's a really big festival for them, even though I'm not of Asian descent, but I've always been celebrating it.
This is the deadliest mass shooting in the United States since last May, when 21 people, most of them children, were killed at a school in Texas. Now the scourge of gun violence will haunt another community.
Pressure is mounting on Ukraine's allies as the embattled nation pleads for more heavy weapons to repel the Russian invasion. Ukraine's asking countries like Germany to provide its world-class tank, the Leopard 2, but German leaders remain on the fence. Ukraine says the indecision is killing its people. The ABC's Matt Bamford reports.
Near the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, Ukrainian soldiers like Dmytro prepare their defences. They're hiding Soviet-era tanks and armoured vehicles between buildings.
We are holding for now. We are standing with machine guns against tanks, and we will see. As long as we have the spirit to fight, we will fight.
The Ukrainians on the front line say it's not just for their country, it's also for Europe.
We need weapons today because after tomorrow, this city can be destroyed already. And if we wait, I will die. But I want to live, and I want to support my country. If you wait, maybe Russia will be in Poland tomorrow.
Ukraine is desperate for cutting-edge military equipment, and at the top of the list is access to battle tanks, especially Germany's Leopard 2. A modern war machine that packs a serious punch, the Leopard 2 is a favourite among Europe's leading military powers. They've been deployed in battlefields from Kosovo to Afghanistan and Syria. But so far, it's unclear if Ukraine's allies will step up. Over the weekend, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz held talks with France's President Emmanuel Macron. The Chancellor talked up his country's commitment to Ukraine, but stopped short of promising Leopard tanks. The US is doing a lot, he says. Germany is also doing a lot. We have constantly expanded our supplies with very effective weapons that are already available today. French President Emmanuel Macron says his government is assessing whether to send its Leclerc tanks into the fray. I asked the Defence Minister to work on it, he says. Nothing is ruled out, and this is indeed assessed collectively with regard to 3 criteria that I've asked to be assessed. Firstly, it should not be an escalation of the conflict. The second is that it can provide real and effective support to our Ukrainian friends. Frustrated by the impasse, Ukraine has denounced what it calls global indecision and says the delays are costing Ukrainian lives. Military strategist Mick Ryan says Ukraine's tank stocks are ageing and depleted.
Since the beginning of this war, the Ukrainians, who went into this war with nearly 900 main battle tanks of their own, have been fighting with old Soviet-era tanks. These are not leading edge. They're pretty old. They've used them very well. But they need new ones because they're wearing out, and the Russians are starting to deploy much more sophisticated main battle tanks to Ukraine.
Why is Germany holding back?
Part of it is the legacy of the Second World War and not wanting to escalate. That's, possibly part of it. But the reality is throughout this war, whilst Germany has provided an enormous amount of assistance to Ukraine, we must acknowledge that, it has generally been slower than other partners.
Poland has indicated it might be willing to donate some of its Leopard tanks to Ukraine. But there is fear among some European nations that sending these heavy weapons could escalate the war further.
And staying in Ukraine, despite heavy fighting in the east, some civilians are returning to towns close to the front line against the advice of authorities. Liman in the Donbass region was occupied by Russian troops last year. 13,000 people are living there in dangerous circumstances, as the BBC's Andrew Harding reports.
In the ruins of liberated territory here in the Donbass, a small town called Liman. It's 3 months now since the Russians were pushed out of here, but they're still close. Ukrainian fighter jets on their way to bomb the front lines 20 kilometers away. Only this morning, another Russian missile crashed into this apartment block. 73-year-old Alexander lives here all alone now, looking after 8 abandoned cats.
I live 7, a rocket na 5.
So you were on the 7th floor, the rocket hit the 5th floor?
Yes.
And you're okay?
I'm okay.
That resilience is everywhere in Liman. It's mostly the elderly and poor who've come back or have clung on throughout. Helped now by free meals driven in daily from safer towns. But amid the ruins, younger families are also getting by. Valery has adopted a stray. He's named Princess Diana. He's a railway worker, now busy trying to keep his neighbourhood warm. There's no central heating in town, no gas or piped water either. Valery's wife, Ira, an accountant, shows me the basement where they've lived for the past 9 months. A warren of tiny storerooms. It's only just now that power has finally been restored here. New Year's decorations still in place. Some of Ira's neighbours in the cellar were openly pro-Russian. There were quite a few Russian supporters down here, she says, but they all left with the Russian troops when they retreated. I guess they were scared of what would happen to them now. In a strange way, the horrors of the last few months have brought this town closer together. Before the war, there were some people here and elsewhere who genuinely supported Russia. That's not really the case anymore. Meanwhile, the mayor of Liman is back and battling to restore basic services. But with Russian rockets still doing this kind of damage, he's not sure the town can cope with too many residents right now. I'm 100% sure that the Russians won't capture this town again, says Mayor Alexander Zhuravlyov. Our soldiers won't let that happen. But still, the front lines are just too close. Close and getting louder as both armies gear up for fresh offensives.
Dating apps like Tinder and Bumble are under pressure to bring in new measures to protect people from violence and exploitation. The social media companies are facing calls for better ways for users to report abusive people they meet on the platforms. A third of people who are using dating apps say they've experienced abuse in person as a result of their encounters. Advocates say it's time for a legal crackdown. The ABC's David Sparks has more.
The dangers of dating apps became all too apparent after the alleged murder of Sydney woman Danielle Finlay-Jones late last year. Police believe she met her alleged attacker on an app. Hayley Foster from the domestic violence campaign group Full Stop Australia says it's time for the companies operating these apps to make sure they know exactly who's using them.
As a bottom line request, we want to make sure that there is a requirement to have identity verification on dating apps, and then from there we can do a lot of work to make sure that people who are using violent and abusive behaviours over time are kept away from these apps. We do 100-point checks when we open a bank account, when we, when we're taking out a loan, but we don't do checks when we're going on a dating app. And I think that it's high time that we looked at that.
So how would it work? Hayley Foster says the person's full identity wouldn't need to be visible on the platform, but the companies should have it for their own records. And she wants governments to go a step further and require criminal background checks for every user.
And we need to have a mechanism for agencies and organisations and those are responsible for creating spaces where people engage to be able to undertake those checks to make sure that we're not putting people directly in harm's way or creating platforms for people to be able to access their next prey.
The Federal Minister for Communications, Michelle Rowlands, is calling on the dating apps to play a stronger role in protecting their users. She's holding a summit on Wednesday with representatives from app companies Grindr, Bumble and Match, as well as criminologists and state and territory ministers.
We have over 3.2 million Australians using dating apps in 2021. So taking all these factors together, we think it is opportune to examine holistically the regulatory framework, discuss with the dating apps what they are doing and what more they can be doing, because again, in the end, the result we want to get is a safer experience for Australian consumers.
Professor Kath Albany from Swinburne University has been conducting research in this area. She says her highest priority will be getting the apps to put in place easier and more effective ways for people to complain about other users.
When I have done interviews with dating app users, one of the main things they're concerned about is if they do feel unsafe on the app or if they do complain about another user, they get a chat response that seems to them to be automated. They don't know whether a real person has seen their complaint or their concern, and they don't know what kinds of redress or help they can actually get from the app.
Kath Aubrey is not convinced that a system requiring every user to legally identify themselves is the best approach.
Yeah, I have interviewed app users who really did not want a real name or identity verification process when they were using the apps. And this is because the people that I interviewed were often from communities where their sexuality was stigmatised or marginalised. Their concern is if the data is leaked, there is no way of putting that genie back in the bottle.
As Australia's major cities continue to grow, there is fierce debate about how to deal with a looming shortage of burial space. In Sydney, there have been no new cemeteries built in the past 50 years, while the population has more than doubled. But now it's hoped a new cemetery on the city's outskirts might ease that shortage. The ABC's Gavin Coote reports.
At this cemetery on Sydney's western outskirts, burial space is quickly running out, and Qazi Ali, who chairs the Muslim Cemeteries Board, is desperate.
It's a nightmare. The reason being the land we have got available at this point in time is not going to go for more than 3 to 4 years.
After running out of room in its own cemetery, the Muslim community was offered 4,500 plots at a nearby Catholic cemetery. but it too is reaching capacity.
It is a situation which is never ending because people will die, and alternatives is cremation. Our religion doesn't allow cremation. Jewish doesn't allow cremation. Catholic also doesn't allow. Most of the Catholic doesn't allow cremation.
A 2021 review found Sydney's major cemeteries could reach capacity within a decade. Just outside the southwest suburb of Campbelltown, construction has now begun on a massive new cemetery. The cemetery, with 136,000 burial plots, will completely surround Jackie Kirkby's 160-year-old homestead.
And they're going to put this cemetery within 10 metres of our boundary. We're sitting right smack bang in the middle of the cemetery. It's outrageous that this could happen.
What's it going to mean for the future of this home?
We've been told by valuers that the home is devalued to the point of perhaps being unsaleable. And that puts us in a very difficult position.
The 133-hectare cemetery has been at the centre of a decade-long battle between community groups and the Catholic Cemetery Trust. And Jackie Kirkby worries for other communities that are slated for new cemeteries.
And it represents just how broken the planning system is. And this community has no confidence in the planning system. You should be working with people and with communities. They're still saying we're doing this for the community, even though this community here has rejected it.
Lauren Hardgrove is the Chief Operating Officer of the Catholic Cemetery Trust.
Look, nobody wants a cemetery in their backyard. When we actually look at sourcing land, we're really limited in what our options are, particularly in regards to zoning, accessibility, and all of those things that need to be taken into consideration. So if it was an essential part of that planning process and considered critical infrastructure, I don't think we'd be facing the same objections that we do.
To the US now, where a Rhode Island police department has received an unusual request from a 10-year-old budding scientist. The young girl has written to the police asking them to run a DNA test on a half-eaten cookie and a carrot left by Santa in a bid to find out if he's real. RJ Heim has the story.
Cumberland, Rhode Island Police Chief Matt Benson was surprised when a package arrived just after Christmas. Inside, a letter from the 10-year-old telling them she took a sample of a cookie and carrots she left for Santa and the reindeer and was wondering if they could take a sample of the DNA and see if Santa's real.
It's incredible for us, and we're excited. We put together an evidence packet and sent it to the state forensic unit. We want to foster her curiosity and her investigative skills.
Her name was redacted by police because they hadn't reached out to the family yet, and the investigation is ongoing.
A surveillance image of clearly a reindeer in that vicinity that night. We do have information of an individual that was observed in the area matching the description of what people would consider would be Santa Claus. We've tracked that individual down, and we're hoping to interview him maybe this week or next.
Just then, a hit on social media from the girl's mom, thanking the Cumberland police for picking up the case. Doing our own investigative work, we tracked down the family, called the mom. She said, "Come on over."
She's always a little bit skeptical and looking for the facts.
Meet budding detective Scarlett D'Amato, who has her own lab of sorts at home.
I watch crime shows, and I thought it was cool to be a detective.
4th grade and 10 years old, too early to be thinking about a career? Yeah. The open case is being pursued by Cumberland police that promise to get to the bottom of the mystery.
Maybe there was a debate that needs to be settled, but and we'll do our part to believe and keep that dream alive.
What would you like the verdict to be?
That he's real.
What a smart cookie, eh? Some of your feedback before we head off on the cost of uniforms and getting back to school. With one kid starting intermediate this year, this person says, and one starting high school, uniforms are a huge expense for us. Makes me wonder why we have uniforms at all. In Canada, where I grew up, almost no schools have uniforms, and I don't see any educational advantage. Either way, this person says, interesting debate whether it's cheaper to buy mufti or a school uniform. That is about all we have time for. Now, the late news team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. If you missed anything on the program, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi popo tomorrow from 5 a.m. First Up discusses Jacinda Ardern's global significance with one of the UK's political heaviest hitters, former Downing Street spokesperson Alistair Campbell. That'll be an interesting listen, so do tune in 5 a.m. tomorrow. Kaua e wariwari te atatero e a mātou kōrero. Don't forget you can check out our videos and stories online.
Good evening, I'm Sarah Bradley. Here are the headlines. Jacinda Ardern will make her last outing as Prime Minister tomorrow, accompanying Chris Hipkins to Ratana's annual festivities. Mr Hipkins takes over on Wednesday. It's emerged a gunman who killed 10 people at a Californian dance venue during Lunar New Year celebrations had attempted to attack a second venue. Surf Lifesaving says more funding could help it save more lives. 6 people have drowned in Auckland since Friday, most of them at unpatrolled beaches. And tip-offs from overseas have led to a Wairarapa man being charged over child sex abuse content. Customs says the 42-year-old Filipino national arrived at Wellington Airport on Saturday from the Philippines. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7 o'clock, and it is 29 minutes to 7 right now. Good evening, I'm Sarah Bradley, and I'll be here until the 7 o'clock news with Todd Zahner. First up, not only do we eat plants, but across history we have used plants to store knowledge, to kill, to fuel wars, to change our state of consciousness, and to indicate our status. Author Simon Barnes explores the plants that have had the greatest impact on humanity in his latest book, The History of the World in 100 Plants. From the mighty oak to algae, cotton to coca, Simon tells 9 to Noon's Catherine Ryan this is a book he was not intending to write.
I was really quite determined not to do it. I'd done a history of the world in 100 animals, and that was a great project and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, do whatever you do, don't do the plants book. It's going to be too much work. You're really not going to want to take that one on. And then there came a moment, I just started making a list. And it's always fatal making lists. And by the time I got to 120,